This is a quick little demo in Applied Accessibility. I am going to do a couple of things to talk briefly about color contrast, which is one of the more important points about accessibility. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to achieve accessibility in HTML. And finally, we'll take the same basic document in a Microsoft Word file and apply the accessibility test to that. So before we begin, just a quick refresher. This is an older PowerPoint, but I just want to remind you that the standards, accessibility standards set by the WAI, are three priorities: priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3. Priority 1 is the minimum required amount. This is what you have to do for basic requirements. Priority 2 is what you should do, and priority 3 is everything else possible that you can do. Of course, why wouldn't we always try for priority 3? In order to do that, we have three different conformance levels. Level A relates to this bottom one here, which is priority 1. Double A is priority 2, and triple A is priority 3. Obviously, the higher up you go on this scale, the more accessibility requirements you have to meet. And so it's very important. It's like sort of grade A beef and then grade double A beef. So where possible, we want to get to that triple A if possible. Finally, two brief points. Where are we here? Here. The first point is that accessibility is measured two ways, and it's very important that you understand this, otherwise you will be bewildered. The first way is what I call hard code or non-negotiable. It's either there or it's not there, and it's easily verifiable by machine applications. So for example, if you have an image embedded in an HTML file or a Microsoft Word document, you have to create what's called alt text or alternative text for that particular image. The reason you have to do that, sorry, I should be making this fuller screen here. The reason you have to do that is because somebody who is blind, legally blind or visually impaired, cannot see the image. And so when their reader passes over that image, there has to be words that will send an auditory message to them that this is what is contained in the picture. So that is binary. The code is either there, or the alt text, whatever it is either there or it is not there. The other way is soft validation, which requires not a machine to identify it, but a human being to intervene and pass judgment. So the example I have here is 3.1.3, unusual words in order to get level AAA conformity. And the rule says there must be a mechanism available for identifying specific definition of words or phrases used in an unusual or restricted way, including idioms and jargon. There is no way for a machine to judge the context, the semantic and linguistic context of the language in that text. You really need a human being to do it. And I'm going to show you what this looks like, especially in the HTML coding, because that really is up to us to do. And there's no way to basically double check whether or not it's been adhered to or not. It's simply a softer requirement. So I want to begin. This is the file that I'll be working with. But I want to begin by talking about something called color contrast. And the contrast checker really measures the difference between the foreground color and the background color. And you can look it up. There's all kinds of explanations online. The mathematics of it is particularly intricate. I'm not in the least interested in it. Some people are. Here's the general point. The concept has to do with luminosity, which is the amount of light that is reflected back off a particular color combination. And the ratio is the foreground to the background. So the foreground has to be the first number in the ratio, So this ratio here is 3.3 to 1, if you can see that. The 3.3 refers to the foreground color, and the 1 refers to the background color. So I've found, this is a website called WebAIM, and the URL is, let me just put this up for you here right now. Make this a little bigger so you can see it. You can still Google it if you want, but it's webaim.org/resources/contrast checker, and it is a fantastic tool and quite easy to use. So the first thing you need to understand about color is that, this full screen here, is that it can be expressed in a number of ways, but one of them is with something called hexadecimal color notation. And a hex means 6, and it's always got a hashtag in front of it. So there are websites, like this one is called htmlcolorcodes.com, and color is spelled C-O-L-O-R, the American way. So https://htmlcolorcodes.com. And the way it works is that you've got a color saturation chart. This is high luminosity here in the top left-hand corner, and low luminosity in the bottom, because it's basically, it reverts to black. So you would pick, if you know the colors you're working with in advance, you can just put them into this this particular tool that I'm going to talk about. But if you're trying to find a color, so you say, well, this is going to be my foreground color. So you pick a particular kind of green that you want. And right now, I hope you can see this, but on the right-hand side here, it's giving me a hexadecimal value, pound 7C6BC3F. There is another set of values here called RGB, red, green, and blue. Another set here called HSL. And a third set, CYMK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which is used for print. But the point is, I can refine, so keep your eye on this color swatch up here on the right. As I move this dot, you can see this getting brighter and brighter. So I can pick whatever color I want. If I go too much to the extreme, I'm going to basically end up in sort of the black or gray area. And you can see down here, everything eventually, if I'm completely saturated, it's black. If it's completely non-saturated, it's white. So I'll just pick a color here, CB5B27. And let's say, okay, that's going to be my text color. So now you go to the WebAIM contrast checker, and right in here, you would paste in the color that you want and hit enter, and you can see here that it's come out red. So it's telling me right now that the contrast ratio is 1.49 to 1. If it were white on white, it would be 1 to 1. The first number to the left of the colon, 1.49, refers to the foreground color. It's always the foreground color. Foreground is text. The background color is the second number in the ratio. And then down here we have, it's going to show you what this will look like. This color font or foreground on this background. And you should know that there are 3 parameters that we check for in accessibility. The first is a normal text size, which is usually a 12 point. As it turns out, if you make the text larger to a 16 point, the color combination actually is more tolerant of a bad color contrast because the font is bigger and it's easier to see. This third parameter here is graphical objects, that is to say images, and user interface components. And I don't use that one very often. I think it has to do with pictures and screen captures and so on. So I'll be honest with you, I haven't really used it. But what I do want you to see is that in the left-hand margin here, WCAG, there's your AA conformity. There's your AAA conformity for this particular color contrast. Now watch what happens. As I make this background color on the right here darker, you can see the hexadecimal changing. And you can see over here the foreground contrast now. It's still 2.03 even though I'm changing the background. It's going to get easier and easier to see. And keep your eye on these parameters here. So if I drop this down now, suddenly I can see here that this particular color combination, font color with CB5, B27, and a background of 2B, 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 gives you a pass for AA in large font and a pass for AA in graphics. But it's still failing with normal text. So what if I begin to make my foreground, my font, a little lighter? Well, can you see that? Okay, so at just back here. So at a 4.15 to 1, it's still failing. But if I move it up just a wee bit, now at 4.53 to 1, it's a pass for AA, and this is what it looks like. But it's still not a pass for AAA. So I can increase the ratio by, I have two choices. I can make the background color darker, or I can make the foreground color lighter. It's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. It doesn't really matter. If I drop this down, no, it won't tolerate it. So that's as low as it can go. That basically means I have to make this brighter, 7.1 to 1, in order to get AAA conformity for this font foreground color and this background color. So that's the tool that will check it for you manually. The diagnostic tools that I'm going to show you will also check it for you automatically, but it will only tell you whether it passes or not. It may not tell you what you need to do to make it pass. I can keep this here. If I make this really light, let's see how far I can go. If I make the foreground as light as possible, which is basically a white, then I've got a lot of room in the background here. You see I'm making this background grayer and grayer, and I can drop down to a, now it's failed, normal text has failed AA and AAA. That's still pretty good, but that's white text on a gray background. It isn't great. If I back it up just a little bit more, you'll see now it's a pass on everything. So that's how all of this works. This code here gives you your hex values. You can copy and paste them into this tool. It's very nice. Here is my practice file in HTML. It has a couple of errors that I'm going to point out before we even run the test. And that is that I'm starting with an H2 tag and then going down to an H1 tag. That is illegal. What's supposed to happen is the first tag you see, the first H tag should be an H1, not an H2. Secondly, I put red text on a green background. That is going to fail for color blindness test because that is one particular kind of color blindness. This is text just floating in the body. This is stuff inside a paragraph tag, and it is a very, very washed out gray that you can hardly see. Here's my image. There's no caption or alt text to it, and there's two hyperlinks here. Excuse me. One is accessibility for audio, takes me to a page, and this is actually going to play
now in a black sky, a sliver of
a sound clip. So, didn't mean to do that. That's what it looks like. Let me show you the code. I have the code here in Notepad, And we'll just open this up a little bit so you can see it. Let me just go through the code with you very quickly. Here's my doc type declaration. Here's my HTML. You may notice this, but I am missing something called a character set definition. What I have here is, it's true that I have a character set definition here, but I haven't expressed it properly, and I've also used an older code, the ISO 8859-1, which is no longer a legitimate code. Here is my head tag that ends down here. I have style tags that you can see right here that I've embedded. I've said for the body, put everything in the center. The top margin will be 30 pixels from the top. This goes top, right, bottom, and left. So it basically goes clockwise for each border of the rectangle starting at the top. So the top will be 30 pixels margin space, 200 on the right hand side, 30 on the bottom, and 200 on the left hand side. I've also coded a footer with a background color here. This is the hexadecimal, a font size of 12 pixels. The color is the foreground, that's my font color, and as you can see, that footer is here. Where's my Notepad Plus? It goes 900 pixels wide, clear both margins. The font weight is how bold it is. The text alignment is in the center. The height of the footer is 2 EM. I'll explain that in a minute, but if you can see here, it's the distance between the top of the font and the inside margin of the footer. And I have set that to 2 EM. Now, EM stands for the width of one character in that font set. So it is a relatively proportional value. It's like a percentage. It's not an absolute value. And however, whatever font I'm using, however wide the average character is, that equals 1 EM unit. So I've made this 2. I've also included in the footer here something called a border radius that will round the corners instead of making them square. And if I take that out, I can show you. Just let me rem this out. So the way you rem out code in a cascading style sheet is you use /* and then asterisk /. If I save that and get rid of the border radius, you will see now in the footer that everything here becomes square. The corners are all square. And so what I decided to do was just round them off everywhere. Then for my H2, I've made it a 2 EM. That's the background color. That's the font. Here's my H1. Here is my paragraph. I'm using a Geneva. What this says is I would like you to use a Geneva font. If your browser or operating system does not have Geneva, use Verdana. If you do not have Geneva or Verdana, then you can use sans serif. So this is how they are strung together. There is my foreground color, that's my background color, that's the end of the style. All right. Where is my main? I'm missing a main. Okay, never mind. So let's take this particular HTML file, and I'm going to go to the W3 validation website. This is a World Wide Web Consortium markup validation service. You can just Google W3 validator, and it will come up for you in Google. Or you can just go there, validator.w3.org. If you look at this interface, I have 3 tabs here with 3 different ways to feed my HTML code into this validator. If it's already up on a website, I can type in http whatever it is, and that's the Uniform Resource Indicator, and it will check it online for you. The second way is you can copy and paste everything in, or you can simply upload your file, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to upload my HTML file. It's called practice.html. I'll upload it here. I have a few other options. I would like to see the source code for sure, just to make sure that everything is good. It's going to detect the character encoding automatically and the document type automatically. One thing that is really handy is this particular feature here that says clean up markup with HTML tidy. So if you have used Microsoft Word to generate an HTML file, which is a ridiculous thing to do because the extra bloat, the extra code that's created is so much, this tool will automatically clean up and remove all irrelevant and redundant code in your HTML file. I don't need that, but I'm just going to say that the feature's there. So we're ready to go. I'll just run the check. And the thing is, if you end up passing regular W3 validation, it's going to go a long ways in helping you reach accessibility standard. So before I even use an accessibility checker, one thing I'm going to do is make sure it passes standard validation. So the first error, it's a warning. It says consider adding a language attribute to the HTML start tag to declare the language of this document. Let me go back here. You can see at the beginning all I've got is HTML, but in the template that you're working with, this is it's saying I would like you to tell me inside the HTML tag what particular language this site is encoded in. So you know what? We'll go back here. I'll replace this HTML with a language declaration. I'll save it. So that's the first error. Second, it doesn't like the ISO 8859-1 character set definition. And you can see here in my code that I have that character set definition right there. So instead, I will take this very simple UTF-8 and I will put it in instead of this one, and that should take care of my character set problem. Excuse me. These are redundant errors here. So what that means is, excuse me, that's not COVID-19. That's just a dry throat. It wants a UTF. So sometimes one error will generate two or three or more errors. I'm going to skip the CSS error for now. And finally, the other thing it's looking for is it says your image must have an alt attribute. I'm going to ignore that for now and just go back, and re-upload. So let's go back here to my W3 and I'll upload my file. And now I have to upload it first. You're going to see that the number of errors is reduced. Excuse me. So the only problem now is it doesn't like the fact that I'm using a float attribute in a CSS code. So it's saying the center tag is not an attribute of float. So if I go up here to my style, it doesn't like this. So rather than delete it, I'm just going to rem it out for now. Let's take a look at our file. It hasn't changed anything because everything is center aligned anyway. So now if I run it through the validator one more time, it should pass basically for everything except that alt image. And I'm deliberately saving that because I want to show you what happens when you go to accessibility. Oh, also it doesn't like this. Line 20, column 9. So I'll go to my code, and this is why I like Notepad+. Line 20. Let me see what it said. Sorry, line 20, column 9. There's line 20. And you can see one, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It doesn't like, I don't know why it doesn't like that. That might be a wrong line number. Well, I'm not going to worry about it for now. Let's not get bogged down. Let's go over here to the accessibility checker. And this is called A-Checker. It's a Canadian site actually. It's very good. Just like the other one, there's 3 ways to input your file. Either by typing in an HTTP address, or by uploading a file, or by copy and pasting your code right in there. I have some options. Look at this. You can, there's a lot of different guidelines here, but right now it's set to conform to AA. That is the intermediate priority 2 status for accessibility. If I want to be more stringent, I can move it over to AAA. I'm just going to leave it by now. And the report format will either come back by telling you which guideline you've broken, or by the line number in the original code. I want to know what guideline I've broken. So file upload, I'll go here, I'm going to upload practice, and I'm going to run the check. And here's where I want to show you something. Now, known problems are 4. And you can see that the first problem is that your image tag is missing an alt attribute. Likely problems are 0. Potential problems, there's 20 of them. And this causes a lot of people to freak out. I can't believe this. How can it be that I've got 4 known problems here, only 2 when I went through WAI, and you're telling me I have 20 possible problems over here? And that's because all of the potential problems are soft. That is to say, the machine can't tell whether we have complied with the rule or not. So number 1, line 67 of the code, and it's a link to a MP3 sound file. And what it's saying is this sound file may be missing a text transcript. So there is a rule that says, it's rule, if you go to the WAIC 1.2.1, any audio only or video only text pre-recorded, this is single A conformity, has to have a text transcript of what's in it. And what this error is saying is, I don't know whether you've got a text transcript of this sound file or not. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. And the reason the computer doesn't know is because it doesn't know all of this other text here, whether that other text is actually relevant to the audio file or not. It has no way of knowing that. And so therefore, it's picked it up as a possible error. And so all of these are outside possible errors. I want to be cautious when I say this, but for the most part, you really don't need to worry too much about potential errors. Most of those are soft and are resolved anyway. And here's an example. It's looking at my code and it says, you haven't told me whether you want me to read this text right to left or left to right. Now, obviously, because I've set the code to be American English, it does not matter, because by default in English everything goes left to right anyway. But the tool is telling me I'm not sure what language you're writing in, because UTF-8 is not just English, it could be a number of other languages. Are you sure it doesn't need any instructions to reverse the normal left to right way to read the code and go right to left instead? And so all of these are pretty well the same error. This is a very interesting rule for accessibility, and that is it's the color alone rule. And here's what it means. You cannot use color alone as a way to differentiate between two different contents or types of content. So very quickly, let me say, let's take a case where you have an office directory of salespeople and marketing people. And you want to show that there are two different groups in your directory. So you want to say, I want all the salespeople to be red and all the marketing people to be green. And the only way you're going to be able to tell whether their sales or marketing is by the color of the text that they're written in. Well, you can't use color alone to distinguish groups. So you would have to do something else as well. You could use color and font, or color and brackets and braces, or some other descriptor that would actually distinguish between the two, but you can't rely on color alone. This test really doesn't understand or know for sure whether or not we have actually used color alone, so it's just warning us. So these are all soft warnings, and you don't really need to worry too much about them. What I will say is if you get hard errors like this and you don't understand what they mean, then you need to contact me. So fixing that basic error is really simple. Where is my image? Here's my image right here. Image SRC. It's linked to this particular place here. I can put the alt text in anywhere, as you know, either here, or I could put it in between image and SRC. I usually put it here so I can find it all the time. And so I would say black and white image of Muddy Waters. And once I save that, you'll see now, if we go back and reload it, that it's identified some other problems. It doesn't like the fact that I have a red text on a gray background, because that is, first off, you can see here, it's a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1, which is required for standard text, and it doesn't look like this is meeting that contrast standard. Also, as you know, you cannot have red text on a gray background because of the color problem. So it's showing you where the error is. All you need to do is go into this code here, and you either have to make the red text darker or the gray text lighter, or both. My initial color is red, so I can go over here to basically a red. I can try to saturate that a little bit. That's this number here. So I will take that to my code. That is my foreground right here in the H1. Let's make this a little bit more intense, and let's make this a background color. Let's just copy this background color and go to our tool here, and sorry, I don't know why that's doing that. Let me paste that in. I should be able to paste that in. I don't know. Oh, there, I can paste it in there. All right, is that what I copied out of my code? 39AC73. Yeah. So that's fine. Let's make this background color a lot darker, so we have a 4.21 to 1. So I'm just going to change my background color to this. And I'll show you in the code here. So we make that our background color. I have to watch, I only need one hashtag. Let's save that, and let's go back to our aChecker validator, and we'll upload the file again, and we'll check it. And now that okay, so it's not sufficient to meet double A. It is sufficient to meet single A. So I might be able to get it a bit better. Let's, did I edit the right? Let's just see if I make that black. Let's check it again. I wonder what my file looks like. Oh, I haven't changed it. Why? Oh, I know why. Duh. Dummy here. It's inside the H1. This is what I need to change here. So let's go back and grab a really bright red. And see what that does. Okay. So you can see here now that this H1, all right, has got a higher contrast. I'm pretty sure this will do it. Let's browse and re-upload. Check it. And it's better. Yeah, the H1 is fine now. The next problem is the H2. And so I would go on in turn and fix the H2 tag, which is up here. So basically that's how you would go through it. Now, what the aChecker hasn't done for me is told me that I can't really have an H1 before an H2. So that's a soft error that you're in for on your own. Let me show you by contrast what happens when we look at the same document in Microsoft Word. So I've tried my best here to duplicate this document. And in Microsoft Word, the accessibility checker is built in, but it is not particularly powerful. It's better than nothing, so if you're working in Word, you have to use it. I'm under File, I go to Info, and I go to Check for Issues. It's the middle menu item there. And down here, I want to take this option that says Check for Accessibility. And what appears here in the right-hand margin under these collapsible menus is, first off, it's telling me that I need an alternative text for this particular image. So when I right-click on the image, there's an option here that says Edit Alt Text. So I go in here, and I'm going to say edit alt text. Add a description. B and W image, a photo. So I can put that in, never mind my spelling. It generates a description, and you can actually have this running while you are working. It's identified hard to read contrast, so it doesn't like the color contrast in the H2 tag. It doesn't like the color contrast in the Peter Paolucci. It doesn't like the color contrast in H1, and it certainly doesn't like the color contrast here in the paragraphs. So it will identify mostly the color contrast problems and the alt text problems. This option is nice to keep the accessibility checker running while I work, and it's a good idea to have this running. So certainly not the sophisticated accessibility checking we have with HTML, but that's basically the idea on how all of that works.